everybody. Thank you for coming out on this particularly warm in Cambridge anyway evening. For those of you I haven't met, I'm Jane Mumford. I work on the alumni relations part of the development team. We've been doing these talks since the lockdown, and they've proved quite popular, particularly with alumni that from an international field. We had one a couple of weeks ago, and we had people from the US, Canada, Switzerland, Spain, which was lovely. I don't know if we've got so many from such a wide field today, but welcome anyway. I'd like to introduce you to Luana Bulat, who's in her final year PhD student at the moment and fellow of the college. She's going to talk to us this evening about teaching computers to understand human language. She has a particularly good background, having been in receipt of the Women in Tech scholarship, which I'm sure she'll tell us a little bit about later. But without further ado, I shall hand over to you. Thank you, Luana. Well, please submit any questions in the chat and we'll come to them later. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jane, and really thank you all very much for dialing in tonight. A little bit about myself. I've joined the college 2 years ago, and I'm now the first fellow and college lecturer in computer science. Now, I don't know if any of you have read Computer Science at Murray Edwards, but even if you haven't, just in case you're interested in the current state of affairs, I thought I would just start briefly by saying a few words about where we are with our computer science students, and then we'll dive into my research as promised. We all know that the purpose of Murray Edwards College is to provide excellence in education of outstanding women. And of course, this includes championing women in underrepresented subjects. Now, unfortunately, computer science as a field still faces a huge gender gap, with women making up less than 20% of the student population overall. And this includes, this is the same in the workforce. Now, even if closing this gap seems like an insurmountable task, I do want to say that the college is doing its part. So we are committed to increasing the number of women studying computer science at Cambridge and also supporting them to achieve outstanding academic outcomes. I know we're early in the process, but I'm proud to say that at this moment, Murray Edwards College has the largest cohort of women reading computer science at Cambridge, and the increased support we've offered to our students has translated into better results year on year. If you have any good ideas of what more we can do to tackle the gender balance problem in computer science and in STEM, I'd be more than happy to hear from you. So please feel free to reach out even after the talk. But now back to tonight's talk. The plan is to just take you on a journey about natural language processing and to hopefully uncover just a bit of what's happening under the hood of this research field, which is part of artificial intelligence. Now, this is a very big buzzword currently in the world. So we will first think about why language is such a difficult task for computers to deal with. And then I'll discuss some ways in which we can encode the meaning of words such that computers can understand and work with them. Now, it seems that we uncover a difficulty of processing language even from the first slide. Some of you might be familiar with the acronym NLP as Neural Linguistic Programming, which is a totally different thing. This is not what we're going to talk about today, but we're going to talk about natural language processing. This is an interdisciplinary field which lies at the intersection of computer science and linguistics, and sometimes is referred to as computational linguistics. It is a branch of artificial intelligence that deals with the ability of computers to understand human language. And it is currently heavily driven by advances in machine learning and also computational capabilities. But why am I so particular to spell out natural language, or why are we as a field so particular to spell that out, as opposed to just referring to this as language processing? And of course, this is done as a computer scientist to differentiate from what we would call formal languages. So natural languages are just languages that we all speak, such as English and Spanish and French. They were not designed by people, although we do try to impose some order on them, but they evolved naturally. Whereas on the other hand, formal languages are designed by people with a specific application in mind. And these tend to have a very strict syntax. So for example, notation that mathematicians use is a formal language that is particularly good at denoting relationships between numbers and symbols. Chemists use a formal language to represent the chemical structure of molecules. And of course, programming languages are formal languages that have been specifically designed to express computation. So now that we're clear that we talk about natural language, do computers really understand language? And I'll start by just letting you be the judge of that. I've picked up some real-world examples of interactions that various people have had with some voice assistants. So this device on the slide, you might have one at home. This is an Amazon Alexa, and this is what someone has asked Alexa. So, Alexa, I need medical assistance immediately. And Alexa's reply says, I have added medical assistance immediately to your shopping list. So it is very clear that, you know, the meaning of that particular phrase was not well understood. Now, because I don't want to discriminate, we'll look at Siri next, which is Apple's voice assistant. And here's the conversation. Hey, Siri, can you let me know when it stops raining out? To which Siri replies, it looks like it's raining right now. A very not particularly useful bit of information. This is not what we wanted. And next up is Google Assistant. So who are you? I'm your Google Assistant, and I can let you know if you'll need a jacket today. Do I? Sorry, I don't understand. Now, of course, it looks like the assistant hasn't memorized what happened previously in the conversation, which is obviously not what happens or not what we want to happen in real life dialogues. So clearly, there's much more work that we have to do. But why is language understanding so difficult? I mean, after all, we all live in a world where we carry a computer in our pockets every day. That's our phone, and we have immense computational resources. So surely we should be able to solve most of the problems. Well, language is beautiful, but it's also ambiguous and metaphorical and flexible. And while all of these attributes make it very easy for humans to master a language, the ambiguity and these imprecise characteristics make it very difficult for computers to process. Now, language is flexible. There's a lot of ways of us saying the same thing. So I can say, I'm presenting tonight, or I'm holding a talk this evening. Both of these sentences have the same meaning. Now, one way you can think that we can get around this problem of having just multiple ways of saying the same thing is just have a bunch of rules or a very, very big dictionary containing just all possible phrasings of a particular thought. But I'm sure you see that this is virtually impossible. Now, humans are also very good at combining meanings of words that they know to make up the meaning of a longer unseen sentence or phrase. You have hopefully never heard this exact sequence of words that I'm saying tonight, yet you understand what I'm saying. So we'll just take ambiguity for an example. And lexical ambiguity in particular, and that's the fact that a word can have more than one meaning, makes jokes really funny, but language processing really difficult. So here we have the question, have your eyes ever been checked? And the answer, no, they've always been blue. So just a play on the word checked. And another one, how do you stop a fish from smelling? To which the answer is cut off its nose. Furthermore, structural ambiguity is not even perceived in most cases in a normal human-to-human interaction. So we use real-world knowledge to or contextual information to fill in the blanks. So if we read this sentence, Sherlock saw the man using the binoculars, we might only see one possible interpretation. Because we know seeing is being done with the binoculars, we'll probably infer that Sherlock had the binoculars rather than the man. But of course, as the image you see now on the slide shows, there are two possible interpretations of this sentence. Now, despite my earlier examples where I've tried to show that technology does fail and it is still not perfect, we do use NLP products every day. And here's just a few examples that you might be familiar with. So we've covered voice assistants like Alexa and Siri and Google Assistant, but also spam filtering is something that we all rely on to just not get those dodgy emails in our inbox. Search engines, I think we've all used either Google, Yahoo, DuckDuckGo. So NLP helps these search engines to better understand your query rather than looking for exact matches of the keywords you input. We can use, prior knowledge of similarity between searches or similarity between documents. And predictive typing is another widely used NLP application together with autocorrect, which I'm aware it fails in very funny ways sometimes. So just to give you an idea of the breadth of NLP tasks and its applications, you can see some examples on this slide. So just to name a few, grammar induction thinks about generating a formal grammar that describes the language's syntax. Lemmatization, it's a task where you want to return words to their just base dictionary form. Named entity recognition, that's an important one where given some unstructured text, the task is to classify named entities, so names, into predefined categories such as person names, organizations, locations, and that helps us understand what's happening in the sentence. But what we're going to focus tonight is on semantics, which is what I work on, and the question of how we can model word meaning inside a computer. So the problem I'm thinking about is how to encode the meaning of a word in a binary world of ones and zeros or numerical values, which the computer can understand. If any of you are interested in linguistics, you might have heard about this, but the traditional view of semantics in a model theoretic approach was that linguistic expressions acquire meaning via interpretation in a model structure. And here, each model structure has just a set of entities. Intuitively, these represent objects or people in the world. Here, John and Alice in the example I have. And the meaning of a content word, here, love, this is called a predicate and is formalized as a mathematical function that maps individuals to truth values. So the drawbacks of this is that, of course, it is rule-based, so it is quite hard to generalize. And the more complex the phrase is, the harder it will be to process, the more rules we're going to need. So one thing we could try now that we have a lot of computational resources is a data-driven approach. So can we infer the meaning of words just from their distribution in a large chunk of text? So basically, this follows what we call the distributional semantics hypothesis, which says the meaning of words is given by their use, and as a quote, you shall know a word by the company it keeps. So the context of a word is going to tell you what that word means. So basically, we just want to look at neighboring words and what do they tell us about the meaning of cats in this example. So cats is underlined in orange. So we might learn that cats can be big, that some instances of cats are lions, but also that cats is a musical. So you can imagine that by reading more and more text, we will learn more and more things about cats. And just as an aside, for anyone that's really, really curious or anyone that's a mathematician, I'll take just a couple of minutes to illustrate how we can actually build these meaning representations. But if this is not for you, don't worry, we'll move along in no time. So under the assumption that the meaning of a word is given by its use or context, what we do is we collect co-occurrence counts. So we just look at the number of times we see cat appearing with lion in the same sentence. That's our context, for example. And we just collect these counts in a very big table, as you can see here. So here we're just trying to find the meaning of cat and tiger, the words in orange. And the words in blue are what we're going to refer to as context words. So then the meaning, the semantic representation of a natural language expression, in this case a word, will just be a line in this table, which of course in linear algebra is just a vector of counts. The beauty of this is that the vector can be viewed as describing coordinates in a point of a point in a multidimensional vector space. So for cat, the coordinate, the number represented on the pet axis is just the number of times we've seen cat and pet in the same context. And similarity between two words now has a very geometrical interpretation of distance in this multidimensional space. We expect that words that are going to be very similar, like cat and dog, to appear very close together in the space, whereas cat and house are going to be in just different places. Now, of course, similarity is a scale rather than a yes or no answer. Cat and dog are more similar to each other than cat and house, and I think we would all agree on that. So, getting the maths out of the way, up to now I've told you that we can learn and encode the meaning of words based on their use in a very large text corpus or just based on their distribution. And this is what I've tried to just very, very briefly describe in the previous two slides. And these models have been very successful in a wide range of tasks in artificial intelligence. But the question I'm asking is, can we infer meaning or all aspects of the meaning from text alone? So how about visual properties? Now, we're inclined to say yes, because we can imagine a situation where we describe watermelons, for example, as being round, having stripes, or being red. However, this is not necessarily the case, because we don't always describe very obvious visual properties through text. So if we just think of the text, some documents we collect from the internet, or just a collection of books, if you search to find the color of bananas, you'll actually get that they're green. The most frequent color that occurs in text is green. And that's because we tend to write about surprising instances rather than very obvious statements or obvious known facts, such as bananas are yellow. We don't tend to say that in just when we write a piece of text. So should we be taking into account visual input besides text through maybe the use of images? But how about other senses like smell, taste, touch? Do we need multiple modalities to encode the true meaning of a word? Another example, everyone knows New York, and especially one aspect about New York, it's very tall buildings. Now, whether we know that from just reading text, browsing through images, receiving a postcard from our friend, or just hearing someone talk about it. But actually, the experience of your first day in New York, where you look around, I still remember the pain in the back of my neck in my first day there. So that's a very different experience. So there is increasing evidence in cognitive science that the semantics of words is derived from our exposure to the language, but also from our interaction with the physical world. And we do learn what a word means, not only by reading text or hearing language, but also through other senses. So it makes sense that we want to model the semantics of words as the interaction between all these modalities. So what I've presented is really the theory of embodiment, which states that human semantic knowledge is grounded in the perceptual system and also in sensory motor experience. And in other words, the semantic representations of words in our brain are dependent on this sensory and on sensory and motor systems, and it is these systems that modulate our semantic processing. And one example that supports this theory is language acquisition in children. So various studies show that this is heavily based on children's direct environment, and also that children learn concrete perceptual nouns first. So they will learn what a hat, milk, cat, mean, and they would only then learn abstract concepts. So how can we encode the meaning of dog? We can use text to get a linguistic representation, as I've showed you earlier, where we just have a vector of numbers that represents this meaning. But if we want to ground these representations in perceptual data, a first choice might be to think about vision. And from a computational perspective, a very good proxy for that is just images. These are just very easily used and understood by a computer because even though they depict images of very cute dogs, the computer just sees it as rows of pixels and just their colors, so red, green, and blue intensity. But of course, vision is not the only important modality, so we can possibly think about grounding in the auditory perception. So we could record sounds of dogs barking and add that information to our model. So you might say that all of these can be described. We can describe how dogs look like, or what they sound like. But for example, so even if we don't find this in text, as the example I've given with the banana, we might be able to verbalize them if we wanted. So we can write a piece of text that describes what dogs look like. But some senses, like for example, smell, that's much more difficult to describe. So everyone here knows what coffee smells like. But I think it's incredibly difficult to put that into words. A hypothesis for this is that we think smell is captured or in a very primitive part of our brain. So we all know it, but we're not very, very good at describing smells because we've never had to do it. And this is when grounding becomes important. So we can build grounded semantic representations by combining information from different sources. And I've given the example of text, images, and audio files. And there's, of course, a lot of research being done on how to best combine these into a single representation, looking, for example, at what weight should we assign to each perceptual modality? So should text matter as much as vision, less than auditory perception, and so on? But I will spare you those details. So what I want to do instead is look at whether these grounded representations actually help us in practice. And if we think about maybe our NLP applications that we've talked about at the beginning of the talk, do grounded representations perform better than just linguistic representations? And is it worth all that extra work of incorporating perceptual information? So of course, it can be nice because it follows this theory of embodiment, which we maybe believe in, but in practice, does it actually matter and does it help? The answer to this question is yes. Now, of course, I don't have access to the big tech companies' internal products to implement and demonstrate this, so I can't go back to the fails of the voice assistants I've given right at the beginning. But I will try to convince you by just using some NLP tasks that we use in a research setting. So ideally, we would like word representations to be able to capture intuitions that humans have in relation to a concept. And properties or attributes are a very natural way for us to describe what something means. And they also have this advantage that they can be generalized. So properties are not class or concept specific. A ball is round, but so is a planet. A table has legs, but so does a giraffe. And we do have these data sets in linguistics that try to capture these intuitions. They're called semantic property norms, and the data set by McRae, built in 2005, is an example of that. So here in this setup, participants are just presented with a word, a concept, such as cucumber or shrimp, and they're just asked to write down properties of that thing. So people might say that the shrimp is edible and lives in water and is pink, and a cucumber is green, vegetable, and eaten in salads. Interestingly, there's a lot of consensus around these properties. So this is a property production task where people are just asked not to, it's not a ticking exercise. Is a shrimp edible? But people are actually asked to come up with these properties. And it is very interesting that we actually all come up with roughly the same properties to describe these concepts. So one way in which we can evaluate our semantic representations is to just look at how well they can capture the properties of words. And if the semantic representations are good, it means that they should be able to reliably predict properties of unseen words. So here you have some examples of properties of bat and blender from some of my earlier work on this topic, where we have used text only in our semantic representations. But what happens if we use visual information as well? And it turns out that yes, indeed, images are better predictors of a word's attributes. So using textual information only, we learned that bananas are green, which is something I mentioned earlier. But using visual information, we predict, better properties, such that bananas are yellow and long and somewhat round. I won't get into that. Another task we can look at is mind reading. And to put it less sci-fi, to what extent do semantic representations correlate with what's happening in the brain? So human conceptual representations. So we want to just evaluate them in terms of their ability to predict brain activation patterns. If we just turn to neuroscience for a second, they use this wonderful technique called functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, to just measure people's brain activity. And this technique just records the brain according to the changes in blood oxygen level, which is believed to be a very good proxy for neural activation or the degree of brain activity. So on the slide, you just see some images, which are just a horizontal slice through the brain. White is low activation and red is high activation. So that's how to interpret that heat map. And this shows how the brain activates when a person is thinking about cats, spoons, and church. So in one of my other publications, we've done an extensive study comparing different types of semantic models in their ability to predict exactly this brain activation pattern. And sparing you the long technical details, here's what we found. Grounded semantic models do outperform text-based models in this task. And interestingly, for concrete nouns, visual information is a stronger predictor of brain activity than linguistic information. So it seems that for concrete things like cats, the visual information matters more. I hope I've convinced you, or I've told you that we can build grounded meaning representations for words. And not only that we can, and it's nice because we might believe in the theory of embodiment, but they are also better. So these models are a better cognitive model of how we think, and they also produce better engineering systems. And I'll stop there. And I'm happy to take any questions through the chat.
Thank you, Luana. Certainly, my brain is now full of your
words.
talk. I'm sorry, I haven't got a question myself because I'm so busy thinking about it.
So I think we do have. So Jane, hi. She says she's a Newhall computer science graduate from a rather long time ago. So hi. It's great to have you here. And I'd love to, at some point, maybe if you drop me an email, or I can talk to you about how it was, how computer science was at that time.
So I've got a question after all. So you're working on asking computers to communicate in English. Do you know how, in terms of, you can use Google Translate to get a written translation of a sentence. Is there any work being done to work between languages in a? I mean, I presume that the Alexa can speak French and Spanish and other languages.
So I think that in a way, the beauty of what I presented is the fact that we just rely on a very large, so if we talk about text, a very large collection of written text, and that can be again from books or from the internet. And this is not language specific. So the technique we use is really just looking at the statistics of words, occurring in the same sentence. And this can be done regardless of whether we work on English or French or any other language. So all we need is just a collection of a long collection of text in that particular language. And we can use exactly the same techniques. So that's the very nice thing about it. We don't really work or worry about the syntax of a particular language or how various languages, are different. So yes, there's this technique can be used on any languages without the need to translate from one to the other. But thank you, Jane, for that question.
There's a question, Luana, in the Q&A.
Yes. So Jane asks or states the fact that different languages don't have a one-to-one mapping between words, and I'm guessing you think about the word and the meaning. So yes, words are ambiguous. So if we use this technique to learn the meaning of cats, which is what I've described earlier, I've given the example that cats are, this animal, but also the musical. So if we are not really careful, we're going to conflate both of those meanings into a single semantic representation. So a further problem down the line is to try to, break up these two meanings and figure out which of, are we talking about cat the animal or cat the musical? And should we have two different semantic representations, which is what we should be doing. So yes, there is some work on word senses ambiguation and building meaning representations that are true rather than just conflating ambiguous words into one. And I've not talked about that in today's talk. I think that was a question. There's a follow-up on that. French and English words like trying to translate is hard. I'm not sure I'm following the example. I'm not really sure I'm getting the question in terms of the translation problem, but I'd be more than happy to, if you can explain that further, that'd be great.
Okay, I've got another question in the meantime. You talked about being able to show pictures of physical objects. For more abstract nouns like freedom, how would you teach it the concept of freedom?
Yeah, so I think we, if we think about these abstract concepts, we might say that perception then, or all these perceptual modalities are not very important. And what really matters then is just text. We do tend to explain the concept of freedom or democracy quite well in text, rather than, we don't have a picture of democracy, I think, or we don't have, if you were to ask more, people around the world, how draw a picture of democracy, I don't think they would look very similar. So in that case, we just rely mostly on text to give us the meaning. So I was talking about the fact that there is a lot of research being done in how to put together, what weight, do they all carry the same weight? And I think the answer is no. As I've maybe said, for concrete nouns like cat, the visual modality is very important, but for more abstract nouns like freedom or democracy, the visual modality doesn't really matter that much, and we should take most of our meaning from just text. So there's another question. When you say you don't look at the syntax, is that not critical for the interpretation of things like Alexa or the Siri use case? Yes, so that's getting into a different thing. So all I've talked about today actually is how do we get the meaning of a word? How do we encode that? And the next question down the line is how do we put two meanings together? So if we have the meaning for black and the meaning for cat, how should we put those two together to compose them to get the meaning of black cat? So that's, a different story. Actually, there are obviously techniques, and the more data you have, you might imagine that now we're talking about billions and billions of lines of text. So it might be the case that black cat, there's sufficient instances of that to just treat it like a single word and use exactly the same technique. But at that particular step, I agree, where we start composing the meaning of words, syntax might be important, and there might be variations between what we do in different languages. Right. There's a question on, yes, I was stating at the beginning of the talk about us at Murray-Edwards having the highest number of female computer scientists, and we're really proud about that. And the question was whether this is for both options. So yes, in previous years, I think if you were correct me if I'm wrong, a natural science student, you could take 25% computer science. So now that has actually disappeared. So to answer your question, yes, it would. We do talk about everyone that's taking computer science, but unfortunately, the option of taking part of a computer science degree as a natural science student has disappeared, unfortunately. So yeah, we do. Yes, I think Jane came back with a follow-up question to, you know, I was saying that I wasn't quite following, where translators usually have a lookup table because they want some words to have one and only one meaning, and how can we deal with that? Yeah, so that's kind of more in the word sense disambiguation problem. My intuition is that most of the times we're looking for the most common sense, the most common meaning of that word, and that's going to be preponderant. You know, it's going to carry more weight in this representation. If more and more examples of cats refer to the animal, most of the meaning of that representation is going to represent the animal rather than the musical. So we might not have to worry about that too much. Thank you for all of these great questions, and it's really nice to see that we do have some former computer science students joining us, but were there any other questions?
Right, okay, I think in the absence of further questions, I might draw this to a close. So thank you so much, Luana. I, for one, am blinded by science.
That was not my intention. I tried to hide away a lot of the details. So if you were looking for those, I'm sorry, they're hidden. Yes.
So thank you, everybody, for joining us. This is the last talk that we'll do this year, but we will be back. I have some people lined up for the Michaelmas term, so do keep an eye on the e-news to find out what's coming up, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was very, thank you for taking the time to listen to me tonight.